Welcome to meeting number 37 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. We are meeting today to have a briefing session with the President of the Canadian Space Agency. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. I would like to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either French or English, and if you will need interpretation, please take a moment how to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance to take full advantage of the time allotted for the questions and answers. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And with that, I would like to welcome our witnesses for today from Canadian Space Agency. We are joined by Madame Campbell, the President. Welcome. Dr. Pierre Bioff, Senior Vice President for the Space Programs. And also we are joined by Stephanie Durand, Vice President, Policy, Communications and Strategic Planning. And also we are joined by Jose Saint-Marseille, Acting Vice President, Corporate Strategy and Innovation and Chief Financial Officer. Ms. Campbell, welcome, and you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will then get into the round of questions. Please go ahead, and thank you for coming before the committee today.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honourable members of the committee. The Canadian Space Agency, or CSA, was established in 1990 under the Canadian Space Agency Act to promote the peaceful use and development of space, advance the knowledge of space through science, and ensure that space science and technology provide social and economic benefits for Canadians. The CSA is responsible for coordinating Canada's civil space program. When the CSA began, Canada was one of about a dozen spacefaring nations. Now, over 90 countries have a public space agency or program. The CSA supports a wide range of government priorities, including economic development through innovation, emergency management, Arctic and maritime awareness, environmental monitoring, and scientific discovery. Working closely with Canadian industry, academia, and other Government of Canada organizations and international partners in space science and technology development, the CSA advances space research and innovation. L'Agence s'acquitte de sa mission au moyen de 3 secteurs de programme. Le secteur d'exploration spatiale.
The agency carries out its mission through 3 program sectors. The space exploration includes human spaceflight initiatives such as the recent Artemis II, as well as other international space stations, as well as missions to explore the solar system. These missions create a significant opportunity for Canadian companies and researchers. Let's take, for instance, the James Webb Space Telescope. This contribution gives Canadian researchers access to the most powerful telescope in the world, which can go back to 13.5 billion years at the beginning of the universe. Another example is Canadian space robots that are integrated into the International Space Agency and play a vital role in the daily operations of the space laboratory. And they help to maintain the station, support astronauts, and perform logistical tasks. It is because of Canada's contribution to space robotics that the Canadian Space Agency astronaut Colonel Jeremy Hansen took part in the recent Artemis II mission. L'utilisation et de la division de l'utilisation de l'espace développe et exploite les ressources spatiales qui soutiennent plus de 40 services destinés aux Canadiens. Les satellites d'observation de la Terre soutiennent la recherche sur le climat, les ressources naturelles, la surveillance maritime, les interventions en cas de catastrophe. La mission de la constellation RadarSat constitue ce système et elle aide d'autres ministères que le ministère de la Défense nationale, l'environnement, changement climatique à remplir leur mandat. Et à la suite d'investissements récents, l'AEC s'emploie activement à jouer et ajouter un 4e satellite afin d'assurer la résilience de ce système.
Le grand secteur fournit un financement ciblé pour aider la croissance et la diversification de notre secteur spatial. Ce financement est très populaire. Pour chaque proposition que l'agence peut financer à partir de notre enveloppe actuelle, elle reçoit régulièrement 3 propositions qui se qualifient.
There is some interpretation problem.
No problem.
20 minutes for a minute to figure it out.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I'm getting English on the French and French
Yes,
on the
that-
Yes. The problem is resolved.
Investi de nos programmes de financement est excellent. Pour chaque dollar
The return on investment for our funding programs is excellent. For every dollar the agency invests in its research and development support programs, Canadian companies generate more than $3 in additional revenue.
The Canadian space sector is an economic engine, contributing $3.8 billion to Canada's GDP, pulling in $5 billion in revenue, and supporting over 28,000 jobs in 2024. Like most countries, space procurements in Canada are exempt from global trade agreements, which allows the application of policies such as Canadian content and Now Buy Canadian to mature those technologies. This is important because about half of the revenues for Canadian companies comes from global markets, and because it's enabled Canada to develop expertise in space robotics, synthetic aperture radar satellite systems, and much more. L'espace s'impose désormais comme un milieu de plus en plus concurrentiel.
Space is now emerging as an increasingly competitive, saturated, and contested environment. There are more than 40,000 pieces of space debris in low Earth orbit. The agency and other organizations around the world are closely monitoring to prevent collisions with spacecraft. We also work with other organizations around the world on rules and standards governing space activities. Indeed, it only takes one entity acting irresponsibly in this precious environment for everyone to suffer the consequences. The CSA's systems are highly secure, but increasingly targeted, requiring ongoing investments in cybersecurity and resilience. As space solutions and services become an increasingly integral part of our daily lives, the agency works closely with the Department of National Defence, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and many other organizations to support the development of space technologies and sovereign capabilities in the space sector.
Space is inherently international, with the harsh and lethal environment leading to high costs and forcing collaboration. The CSA has a long-standing relationship with counterparts in the United States, Japan, and many other countries. Since 1979, we've been a cooperating state member of the 27-country European Space Agency, gaining access to important missions for Canadian companies. The CSA ensures that space activities serve the public interest, advancing science, supporting government operations, strengthening the economy, delivering benefits to Canadians, and inspiring the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will start our first round of questioning of 6 minutes each, and we will begin with MP Baldinelli. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. Again, first of all, I will want to begin by saying thank you to all of you, and in fact, the entire Canadian Space Agency team on the success of the Artemis II mission and the involvement of Jeremy Hansen, the first Canadian to go in orbit around the moon. But saying that, as members of His Majesty's loyal opposition, we do have some questions we like to ask in order to safeguard those dollars that are being spent by the CSA. So first of all, I'd like to go to you, Ms. Campbell. Canada's defence and industrial strategy identified space as a key sector in which Canada should build sovereign capacity. So in your role as president of the Canadian Space Agency, what can you tell us about the Spaceport project in Nova Scotia?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question, and thank you for the comments on the Artemis II mission, which were the result not only of our extraordinarily capable astronaut, but also decades of investment in Canadian space robotics. The reason we had a seat on that flight was investments in Canada's leading-edge technology and know-how. We're the best in the world in space robotics, not only the technology, but also we have 25 years of experience operating robotics in space, and we're very sought after, and that's what gets us invited to international space missions. For most of recent space history, the world has been dependent on a few industrial players to get to space. So I think last year, 85% of the mass launched to space went to one company, a United States company, SpaceX. And most of the planet is trying to diversify so that there's choice and competition. In fact, space launch in the United States right now is quite crowded. They have mostly coastal spaceports. It's very crowded. Canada has a lot more land. We have access to polar orbits, and we have coasts over which it's safe to launch from. So the Canadian Space Agency has been investing for some years now in launch technologies, reusable rockets, hybrid rockets, and now the government has recently said that there will be investments in space launch from Canadian territory. We welcome it, for the reason that it gives us resilience and some options. Yes, sir.
Point. Sorry about that, but you led me to the next question with regards to this specific identified project, the Spaceport in Nova Scotia. Was the Canadian Space Agency ever consulted with regards to the selection of this particular site?
Not on the selection of that particular site, but we do have some history with them. In 2021, we were present and signed an MOU with the then State Space Agency of Ukraine. And the head of it was a gentleman by the name of Vladimir Toftai. At the time, the goal was to use Ukraine's proven mid-sized rockets in collaboration with the spaceport in Nova Scotia. So the Canadian Space Agency, we are agnostic. We will help fund technologies that support access to space, and we welcome choice with space, but we weren't involved in the selection.
So the $200 million allocated over, I believe it's a 5-year period, is that funds that will come from the Canadian Space Agency? Is it through D&D? And did you have any role in providing advice on a proper selection of a site to be identified?
It's not the Canadian Space Agency funding. The Canadian Space Agency was, to my knowledge, checking with colleagues here, not involved in the selection of a site. However, we do welcome increased choice and options in Canada for space launch.
Would you not agree? Wouldn't it have been wise if the government is going to commit $200 million towards this project that it would have sought the opinion and input of the Canadian Space Agency before allocating those dollars towards this project?
Just going to make sure, so the Defense Industrial Strategy, as was mentioned, identified commercial space launch as a critical capability for our sovereignty. If there's an issue with our satellites, we will need to get there rapidly. As far as the CSA is aware, there are a number of companies interested in commercial space launch in Canada, but it's a challenging long-term investment and requires some support from government.
So just to clarify, the CSA had no involvement or advice to provide to DND on the selection of this particular site. That was a sole decision of the Minister of National Defense and Cabinet with regards to the selection of that site. CSA never made an approval or a recommendation to that spaceport, Canso, Nova Scotia site.
The CSA has provided $7 million in funding between 2017 and 2025 for launch technologies through our space technology.
I'm asking, did they seek your input directly on the selection of this specific site that they chose to provide $200 million and actually backdate the contract for? So it's $20 million dollars. I believe it's, is it 20 million over 10, for example. But did they ever seek, I mean, you would think, surely, to goodness, that the government would seek the input of the Canadian Space Agency on the selection of a spaceport for launch capabilities before allocating those type of dollars.
If I may, the Canadian Space Agency was involved with Maritime Launch Services in 2021, signing an MOU with the State Space Agency of Ukraine to collaborate and ensure access to space from Canada. The CSA is also engaged with Defence Research and Development Canada to support the $105 million Launch the North Challenge. As part of this challenge, 3 Canadian companies, Nord Space Canada Rocket Company and Reaction Dynamics, are advancing launch prototypes with initial,
Time
the
is
initial
up.
launches targeted.
Yeah, time is up for
2028, okay, thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to MP Nathan for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, congratulations on the successful Artemis 2 mission. A wonderful moment for all Canadians to really rally behind our very own Jeremy Hansen and Jenny Gibbons. I think it may be helpful to break down what space research really is. Can you speak to how research in space makes a difference here on Earth?
Oh my goodness, yes, and we're very lucky. We have here the Vice President of Space Programs beside me who's got for example. At its beginning, when Canada first launched Earth observation satellites, we had a program to give funding at the same time as Earth observation data because no one knew how to use it. So we would give data plus funding and say, please figure out how to use this. Now we have an industry, commercial Earth observation industry, who are generating return on investment themselves. Some of them don't even have spacecraft. They just manipulate the data to give value-added products. And it has applications in a range of domains: critical mineral extraction, supervision of mining operations, definitely weather applications, environment, biodiversity, keeping ports clean, you name it. Space exploration, the harsh environment of space, teaches us a lot about human health. So many of our applications in science on the International Space Station have return benefits here on Earth. The body ages in space. It's not particularly good for you to go to space. The first thing that happens is all the fluids in your body go up to your face. You might have seen it in our astronaut. It's bad for your eyes, bad for bones, it increases the risk of cancer, diabetes, a number of other things that we face here on Earth. So by supporting human health and doing experiments in human health, we can learn a lot about how to prolong human life and quality of life here on Earth. Technologies are also better. If they can survive in the lethal environment of space, they will be much more robust here on Earth. An example of that is our space robotics. Spin-off benefits have been in neurosurgery and also cancer detection.
Does anybody want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, I would say the first satellite that Canada sent in space was to study the ionosphere, and it was to understand how we can better communicate in Canada. So really it was a science that helped the communication in Canada, and then we launched the first satellite in satellite communication. We have another example with SciSat, which was launched to study the ozone layer, and is still in operation after more than 20 years of operation, and still making new discovery in how the high atmosphere is behaving. So there is many examples like that.
Very good. Thank you for that. My next question is, our government, with the Defense Industrial Strategy and a committee's own study on defense and dual-use research, is working on a push for how research can build up domestic sectors. So can you speak to what the space sector looks like in Canada right now? And what opportunities are present, and how can we support them better to enhance research and create more jobs?
Canada's space sector is extraordinary. More than 200 organizations generating $3.8 billion to the GDP. We've done a space sector report. This is our 28th, I believe, this year. And they're vibrant and growing. We've seen the business expenditures in research and development increase by 17%, and we've seen a growth rate of 15%. So they generated $5 billion in revenues. They're extraordinary. About half of their revenues, almost 50%, comes from global markets. Our main market at the moment is the United States, but as I mentioned, Europe is another important market. And one of the things they tell us is that the Canadian Space Agency's procurements and our technology development programs are an important driver for them. Having anchor contracts helps them when they go to international markets. But increasingly, the Canadian Space Agency is not the buyer of space services and solutions. Increasingly, it's Environment Canada, Natural Resources Canada, National Defence. At the beginning, it was us, but more and more, it's other departments and agencies who can achieve their goals through space services and solutions. Our portion is truly the pure space segment.
Thank you for those answers. That's great to understand it a little bit more. Can you speak to the importance of funding these space missions? You've given a lot of examples why this is important, and how it connects to nation building and sovereignty enhancing missions.
Thank you for the question. Space is infinite, and there are an infinite number of expensive missions that, from a science perspective, might be interesting to pursue. But we work very closely with international counterparts to make long-term plans on what science should be pursued within our solar system, what is the next mission. So most space missions that the Canadian Space Agency is part of are international. We do it with international partners. And most space missions involve some kind of an industrial contribution in return for which you get science benefits and sometimes human spaceflight. So that's the way the International Space Station works, which we've been part of for over 25 years. We pay common operating fees, but we also contribute technology, and in return for that, we have access to science, and also our astronauts can fly there. Same thing with Artemis II, and we hope to progress that. Same thing with the James Webb Space Telescope. Canada contributed 2 instruments, and for that, we have researchers who are able to have access to data looking back 13.5 billion years.
Thank you so much.
Time is up, and we will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins de l'Agence spatiale qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you to our witness from the Canadian Space Agency. Canada is the only country from the G7 who doesn't put its own satellites into orbit. Can we really talk about space sovereignty in this context? Thank you for the question. From the perspective of the Canadian Space Agency, it's always been important for us to support the launch sector, but we really focus on what's happening in space. We've always thought that a great country like Canada that has a lot of space for launches should make use of it. And I'll give you the example of our stratospheric project. France came to us because they wanted to go to the area just before space where we can launch balloons. And so a base was created in Timmins, and we've done a great deal of science in order to eliminate the risk and to prepare a lot of scientific research for the International Space Station. And we, of course, would like to see launches from Canada. And that's why we invested the $7 million that I mentioned in our launch capacities. And so what is Canada able to do today in space without depending on the United States?
Avec l'Agence spatiale européenne.
Well, I talked about our collaboration with the European Space Agency. Like Canada, Europe is also interested in launch capacity, and the James Webb Telescope was launched on an Ariane 5 rocket. And they're currently working on Ariane 6, and it was from French Guiana. So this is an example of another rocket, and I spoke about Ukrainian rockets, and of course we all know what happened there. Our wish is to have more choice and variety to focus on our resilience. So choice and variety, but you spoke about sovereignty, and it's a very popular word these days in Canada, especially in Quebec and Alberta. So can you tell us what proportion of Canadian space programs depend currently on the United States? Can you give us a proportion? Or if not, could you provide us the breakdown of this information for all Canadian space programs?
Tous nos satellites de notre centre de contrôle,
all of our satellites from are monitored from our control center, so there's not a dependence. It's more a question of partnership. And the International Space Station, for example, well, there are 5 main partners who all have their own role to play, and Canada plays its role independently from our control center at the Canadian Space Agency. And for our other missions, we're responsible for our portion entirely, and it's entirely our responsibility. So there's no, in your opinion, no Canadian space program that depends on American interests. Of course, international partnerships are important to us. The United States has one of the largest space agencies. Then after that, there's the European Space Agency, and we're trying to diversify. And so if we have a partnership with the United States, and there were some changes to our agreement recently, and that can affect us. And speaking about uncertainty, there's some uncertainty regarding Canadarm3. So what is Canada's plan B? What's the agency's plan B if Washington changes its priorities? That's a great point. Thank you very much for the question. As I mentioned previously, space robotics from Canada is the best in the world, not only the technology, but also the way we do it. The Canadarm3 was our contribution to the lunar mission just before the Artemis second mission. The decision was announced to suspend this mission and in order to have instead of having a small satellite around or a small space station around the moon, it was decided that there would be a mission to the surface of the moon. This was done in collaboration with Japan and the United States. And so we had 2 flights, and we had one flight where we're one of the only countries that was able to benefit from this. And we're currently having active discussions with the company. We're in phase C and D of the contract design and construction. And so we need to be able to pivot and in order to have a mission on the surface of the space. And space robotics is experiencing high demand for the surface of the moon, for orbit, in low orbit. And so not a day goes by that we don't need the Canadarm, and everyone needs it.
Ms. Campbell, to come back to what you said, not one day goes by without talking about sovereignty, but we don't see this in action. So how can you say that Canada can be sovereign over the Arctic without any real spatial autonomy? Currently, our satellites observe the Arctic and gather precious data for the population of Arctic populations to keep an eye on glacial conditions. We also have missions dedicated to the Arctic. There's less commercial interest in the Arctic because it's a small population, but for public interest, there are 2 missions. One that would surveil the Arctic as a whole, and the other that would observe the quantity of water in the snow. This is very important for Hydro-Quebec, for example. So we have spatial solutions for problems here on Earth. In your opinion, are we fully sovereign over the Canadian Arctic due to our weak spatial autonomy?
Maybe you can second round.
Permettre une réponse par écrit, Madame la Présidente. Merci. C'est oui ou non?
I'll offer a written question, Madam Chair.
You'll get opportunity to ask again also. With that, we will start our second round with MP Ho for.
Nous passerons.
So when Canadians think about space, they think about excellence, right? They think about engineers, scientists, specialists, and astronauts who earned their place through discipline, training, and competence. So when it comes to hiring and promotions within the CSA, for any role related to flight safety, launch safety, astronaut safety, or mission-critical operations, is it your position that experience, qualification, and technical competence must come first?
We are going to need everyone in the space sector. It is the top issue preoccupying all space agencies around the world.
Qualification and technical competence should be the primary consideration when you hire and promote. Is that correct?
Definitely
Yes.
Foremost.
Yes.
But
Okay.
there are many other factors that play into it.
Canadians expect the CSA to bolster Canada's space capacity. They don't expect the agency responsible for Canada's role in space exploration to be distracted by ideological hiring frameworks or bureaucratic identity targets. So to clarify, there should be no political, ideological, or demographic quota that overrides technical merit in these safety-sensitive roles in the CSA, right?
We're fortunate to have way more applicants for positions than we can hire. They're all super qualified, and then once we recruit them, we train them intensively. We succession plan because most of the roles of the agency are mission critical, and so we're very fortunate to have very qualified people on the CSA team.
Your agency published the 2025-2028 Employment Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan. In that document, it says that the CSA will focus on, quote, identifying and dismantling systemic barriers, end quote, and supporting career progression towards executive positions exclusively for designated groups. Can you point to this committee to the section that says mission safety and technical competence come before identity representation targets?
The Canadian Space Agency are glad to have a diverse team because we need a diversity of ideas to face the challenges and opportunities ahead.
Not really answering the question there. So I'll ask another question, I guess, and continue on. Is there any circumstance where a candidate's identity markers will be used as a deciding factor over a more technically qualified candidate when it comes to selection of astronauts or any technical or safety staff?
Research has shown that having diverse teams leads to better outcomes, and so that's what we strive for in all aspects of our work.
Could you answer that? Like, is that a yes, whether it could be candidates' identity markers could be an overriding factor, or is that a no?
I'm not sure it's that absolute. There's a mix of factors that we take into account when looking at the composition of teams, and obviously their technical competence, their teamwork, collaborative capabilities.
So that means
all
there
of those
could
things
be,
matter.
but identity markers like the person's sexual orientation or their gender or their race is going to be a factor, because you said you talked about diversity. Is that right?
We try and make sure that we have teams that represent humanity in all of its forms.
I mean, it just looks like the CSA is publishing plans that read less like space safety or exploration and more like an ideological document. So I guess my next question is how much taxpayer dollars has the CSA spent on DEI-related grants, programs, staff, consultant, training, committees, and internal initiatives each fiscal year?
So if you have a look at our last departmental plan, the total spend was $634 million, of which 86% was on the core responsibilities of Canada in space, and the remainder was on internal services, which includes cybersecurity, human resources, installations, and the core responsibilities are actually going to increase next year because the internal services, much of it is in support of space.
So you don't have the numbers. So could you table that information in terms of money spent on DEI training, DEI workshops, DEI grants within the CSA, and table that information for the committee for a future date?
Give me 1 sec.
So,
I might have it here. Do I have it here, colleagues, in the materials? Just want to make sure to answer the question. If I may, just answer as well, though, at the moment, the space sector doesn't represent humanity. It's 29%.
So I'm gonna continue. So I'm reading from the CSA DEI action plan. It says, quote, the CSA aligns with the Government of Canada's gender-based analysis, the GBA plus approach, requiring all activities, policies, grants, projects to undergo a GBA plus assessment to ensure equitable access to opportunities in the Canadian space sector. So did you undergo a gender-based analysis when selecting Jeremy Henson for Artemis II? Yes or no?
Again, we make sure that teams are diverse and
to undergo a GBA assessment. Did you go through a GBA assessment with Jeremy Henson when you hired?
our astronaut selection processes.
That's right.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up.
Did you answer that? Yes or no?
Time is up. We can come back, and with that, we will go to MP Rana for 5 minutes. MP Rana.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for your valuable time. Madam Campbell, the Artemis II mission was a remarkable moment for Canada. Beyond the achievement itself, what did it mean for nation building and Canadian sovereignty in space?
Thank you for the question. So for those of you who watched the uncrewed flight, Artemis 1, it was a very complex rocket. It costs $4.2 billion. and supports 24,000 jobs in the United States. However, that rocket probably will be modified over time to simplify and be faster because the United States and the rest of the world are interested in a more rapid cadence of missions. But the most important piece was to fly a crewed mission to show that after all of these investments, we are able to return humans to deep space after more than 50 years. And so I mentioned earlier, Canada's industrial contributions in space robotics are why we were there. We signed a treaty and said that for the contribution of our advanced space robotics, we would have 2 flights and science on Gateway. And there we have it. We received one of the most important benefits. So it's not only the astronaut flight, it's all of the science that was done, CubeSats that were launched, being part of an international partnership, the companies, and there are hundreds of them who have been part of it, the work here on the ground in support of that, in support of advancing our space robotics. There's a prime, but hundreds of smaller companies who are part of that as well. And then it also positions Canada very well for the next step, which is a permanent crewed presence on the moon.
Thank you. And as you mentioned earlier, Canada's space sector now contributing $3.4 billion to GDP and employs nearly 14,000 people.
Direct jobs and 28,000 if you count indirect.
Thank you. So where are the strongest opportunities right now and what would help the sector grow further?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So we look at that very carefully because, as I mentioned earlier, space is increasingly competitive. More than 90 countries have investments of some form, both for their own services, but also to contribute to international missions. So we want to make sure that what we bring is unique and sought after. We've been very successful with space robotics. We are the best in the world, especially because we have 25 years of operations in space robotics. No one else has that history and legacy, but we want to keep it up because it is sought after. We know that for in-orbit servicing, for satellite servicing, for debris management, for logistics on the surface of the moon, and then also for space stations that are planned in low Earth orbit and beyond. We are also very good at synthetic aperture radar, our RadarSat Constellation mission, which I mentioned, which allows us to see through clouds and at night. And we share this data with the world. In return, we get valuable satellite data that helps us. So there's a wonderful international charter of space and major disasters, of which we're a founding member, and it's the world's eyes in the sky that come together to help in emergency management. That's very valuable, but we wouldn't be able to participate in that if we weren't good contributors. So that we want to also keep up. Earth observation, we also need it for our country. Second largest country on the planet, we will definitely need, and we've seen the demand growing for Earth observation data. But there are other areas that will be in high demand. Power generation, logistics on the moon, food production, and also health. So there are areas where we could achieve both investments that help us here on Earth. For example, providing health services to people in remote communities and providing them with autonomy. We've done a bit of work in that area, and it's been sought after here on Earth. It also has applications with astronauts. It's why we've focused a lot on life sciences. Don't show us.
Thank you for your comprehensive answer. You have something to add, please?
I will add the satellite communication. Canada was one of the first country, and we depend on the satellite communication, and we can see we have one of the very good company in the world that is doing that now. So.
And can I just mention LEO PNT?
And LEO PNT.
More and more, there's a demand as well for low Earth orbit position navigation and timing. Current position navigation and timing can be subjected to hacking and is vulnerable. So there's a huge demand for low Earth orbit position navigation and timing. And then also a demand for capacity in the north, which we're very good at and could do more of.
Thank you very much. The space environment is changing fast, commercially, geopolitically, and technologically. So where do you see the CSA's priorities heading over the next decade?
We hope the space environment will remain safe for all of us to use and do even more in. At the moment, I mentioned earlier the 40,000 pieces of space debris bigger than 10 centimeters that are in low Earth orbit. Those are dangerous. Irresponsible conduct by one actor, whether it's in any satellite missile test or other, creates thousands of pieces of debris that affect us all. We've had to maneuver the International Space Station to avoid pieces of debris, and with planned megaconstellations, those risks increase. So responsible conduct in space, investing in technologies like reusable rockets as we've done, doing that more is important.
Time is up for MP Rana, and we can come back in the next round, and we will go to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Madame Campbell, est-ce que l'Agence spatiale canadienne reconnaît que les politiques America First...
Ms. Campbell, does the CSA recognize that America First procurement policies present a direct risk for Canadian space sovereignty? There have been great changes recently, not only for the space program, but for many other programs, and we're constantly communicating with our companies to know how we can support them. But this wakes us up to the importance of other partnerships. I mentioned the European Space Agency earlier. They're my predecessors who, in 1979, realized it was important to have multiple friends and who launched this partnership. In November, we made a historic investment of 400% more because it's an important access to the European market that our small and medium-sized companies really appreciate. It allows them to compete and to earn contracts, and for each dollar we invest, they receive 3 in terms of revenue. We also have more partnerships with Japan, India, Arctic countries, and many others. So we want more partners. I appreciate the positive actions, but I was talking about Americans specifically. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you qualify Canadian leadership as far as space is concerned? As mentioned earlier, we are 1 out of 12. Now there are like 90 countries. If it only depends on money, I think the statistics are pretty descriptive. They demonstrate that we're one of the top countries, but when it's a matter of capacity, we're still among the few countries that are always operating every day in space. But on a scale of 1 to 10, what is our leadership? It depends on the field. Apologies for not giving you one question. There are countries that are very good in one thing, other countries that are good in another. For us, space robotics and satellites are the main fields, but there are other fields we could also invest in. Has Canada ever been a leader in a great international spatial mission? Leader of a great mission. We now have a Canadian company that was selected by Europe. It's the leader of a mission to create internet in space, competing with SpaceX. Has Canada ever been the leader in a great international space mission? It's the one I'm talking about. It's called Hydra. So when it's planned, so it never happened. What date? I just want to make sure I'm answering correctly. It doesn't seem that questions are being answered. Canada is among the James Webb Telescope, the International Space Station. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm asking what missions. I'm not given a mission.
With that, we will proceed to MP Mahal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Madam Campbell, I will start with you. Canada has world-class expertise in space science. Yet this government has recently cancelled what would have been Canada's first rover mission to the surface of the moon. A mission which would have, if launched, been completely run by Canada. At a time when our allies are racing to establish presence on the moon, why would Canadians believe the Canadian Space Agency has a serious long-term strategy for space leadership when a groundbreaking project has just been cancelled? So if you can comment on that.
As a result of the comprehensive expenditure review, the CSA is expected to save $41 million by 2029-2030, and then after that, $8.3 million ongoing. So savings were achieved by terminating and scaling down some projects, as well as optimizing our workforce. It reflects budget decisions that had to be made that are challenging. I can say that we learned a lot through the work that was done on the project. In other words, the technology was advanced that could feed into other projects, including the Lunar Utility Vehicle, a $1.2 billion vehicle that is planned for the lunar surface, and the science continues. The science projects that were funded.
Would you agree with me that making such budget cut decisions at this vital point of a project would have a devastating effect on, you just mentioned in your previous statement that we have over 200 companies, those are involved in this industry. and it's billions of dollars of revenue that's being generated by them. So would it not be fair, would it be fair for those companies who are invested in those projects who have been cut out of sudden by these kind of announcements by the government?
This was a discrete project which involved it involved primarily one company. It was a competitive contract that was awarded. The company was paid for the work that they had done. The technology was advanced. The science continues. And yes, it was a difficult decision. It does, however, happen sometimes. There are other projects that the Canadian Space Agency has had to stop. And in the current context, as I mentioned, it was in the context of an expenditure review as well.
Yes, what I'm saying is we have just seen, every Canadian has seen Canada's space expertise in action with Artemis 2. Shouldn't Canada be taking active role in pioneering space exploration rather simply relying on participation in other countries' missions? What do you want to say?
So we are actually advancing our space robotics, our surface mobility on the moon, and these are important billion-dollar contributions that Canada will bring on our own.
I would want to take you back on that budget cut on lunar rover mission that has just been announced in the last budget. This sounds like another case where Liberal government announces ambitious projects, spend millions of taxpayer dollars, celebrate the early progress, and then walks away from those projects without Canadians seeing any results. The lunar rover mission has already passed important milestones. And while most of its initial budget has been spent, who's responsible for this failure? The Canadian Space Agency, the minister, or the government that has failed to follow through?
I wouldn't call it a failure because some of the technology and science was advanced, and as I mentioned, the science continues. The agency has a robust governance framework. Space projects are very hard, and not all of them progress to launch and to testing in space. Some of them have to be stopped earlier, and it's the responsible thing to do if they're not achieving either the project goals in time or the budget, if it looks like they may exceed the budget. There are a number of factors.
If majority of the money was already spent on and majority of the steps were already been taken into the project, wouldn't it be it make more sense to complete the project, let it complete, and make your presence known in the airspace of the country?
As I mentioned, the CSA was asked to save $41.3 million by 2029, 2030, so difficult decisions had to be made.
Let's move on. Canada is putting more money into European space partnership. At the same time, we are trying to build our own domestic space industry, as per your statements. How do we ensure that this does not become another case where where Canadian taxpayers fund innovation, but commercialization and manufacturing end up outside of Canada?
What's helpful about this?
Time is up. Maybe we can come back in the next round. And with that, we will go to MP McAlvey for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you also very much for being here, and congratulations again on your successful mission. It was a lot of fun to watch the launch at home and be glued to the television to see all those momentous occasions with Artemis 2. My question is, recognizing we're on Science Committee, we're doing a lot of conversations around partnerships. And one of the things that I think is so great about the Canadian Space Agency is it's really important to everything that you do, whether it be international partnerships, partnerships with the academic community here in Canada, partnerships with industry, and with other departments within the Canadian government. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to some of those partnerships and collaborations that you have with Canadian universities and also colleges and polytechnics, because they're one that we're particularly having a lot of focus on this session.
Thank you very much. So we work with universities, colleges, and schools across the country. Many of them now have dedicated space programs. And for all of the missions that I mentioned, there is usually a principal investigator at the heart of it, a scientist who has dedicated his or her life to exploring that star, advancing that mission, advancing that technology. Sometimes they work in industry as well, but often they're attached to universities. And in fact, there's also an interesting We see growth out of the University of Toronto with Spaceflight Laboratory and Robert C. There's a gentleman there who's believed in smaller missions, and that's one of the things that we've seen over time. Spacecraft have become smaller. We're miniaturizing the technology, which makes us able to do much more, launch more at a relatively lower cost. So the science community is hugely important to us, and they're very passionate. There are experts in astronomy, experts in physics, experts in space science, you name it. Canada has extraordinary researchers. That's often why we're sought after. It's often why we're invited to be part of missions. And often the question is, how do you find a budget for it? Who's going to be financing it? Is it feasible? Is it at a technology readiness level that we can actually advance it? How long will that take? So those are the kinds of discussions we have. We also collaborate very much with other government departments, as I mentioned. My colleague, Madame Durand, co-chairs a governance table of over 20 government departments to look at the demands for space services and solutions in Canada and make sure that we're planning for the long term together. So sometimes budget requests may come from environment, but have a small space aspect because of the Canadian Space Agency's involvement.
Thank you. And I don't want to leave out geologists and geochemists because I know they're very excited with the samples that you bring back. And there's lots of great Canadian research in that regard, especially small organic molecules and what's happening with them. So my other question is about that partnership and as we roll out the defense industrial strategy and really satellite technology. And as we are increasing our surveillance, we know that things are changing, particularly through the Arctic. There are lots of different options around remote sensing, data collection. So I'm just wondering what sorts of partnerships you might have underway or discussions underway with both defense, but also with the Geologic Survey, which I think has a great capacity with expanded satellite and data collection.
Most space technologies are dual use in the sense that they can do both things. If you put a platform in space to observe for environmental and natural disaster purposes, it could probably detect heat. You know, infrared technology in space can also see what's going on in the ground. And if you look at the utilization of our current satellite, RadarSat Constellation mission, 50% of the data goes to the Department of National Defense, and it's always been the case. It makes sense as a country if we have that capacity that we use it for all of our needs and for security purposes as well. So we remain a civil space agency. On the other hand, we are also happy to help grow a Canadian space sector that can then meet the moment. If there is a need to invest in security in the north, in the Arctic, there are also a number of space applications that can help with what we want to do in that regard. I also mentioned how space has become increasingly populated, and you know, there used to be land, sea, and air as the warfighting domains. Now space is one of those domains as well. It's meant that we've had to increase the cybersecurity posture of our spacecraft constantly, invest in resilience, because we operate them civilly, but we are under no illusion that they are under constant threat, so we watch that very carefully. And with the rest of the world, we are trying to make sure that there are rules and norms of conduct in space, which everyone follows, so that we don't make it even more dangerous. Space is hard enough. It's lethal for humans. Debris poses a serious problem, so we're trying to keep it safe for everyone.
So I think what I heard there is that it's the final frontier. Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay. And with that, we will start our third round with MP Holman for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming into this committee. First of all, again, I want to echo what my colleagues from all over the committee have said. Congratulations with regards to Artemis II, and especially on the success of Mr. Jeremy Henson orbiting the Earth. I know he is an inspiration to Canadians from coast to coast to coast. My first question is with regards to the International Space Station. Yes, billions of Canadian tax dollars have been put into the International Space Station. I still remember myself being a young lad, and the pieces were being launched up in the late 90s, and mankind started to orbit the International Space Station in the year 2000 as it continued to be built. The reason I bring it up is my concern for the planned deorbit of the International Space Station as of 2031. I was just wondering, what is the CSA's position on that? And has there been any discussion to move the usage of the International Space Station beyond 2031? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a live one for all of us in the space community. It is humanity's precious microgravity laboratory, but it's getting older. There's a leak on the Russian module. Our Canadarm is constantly doing repairs. We've put out solar arrays to keep fuel and power going, but the stress and orbital mechanics on it, at some point it will have to deorbit. The United States had plans for commercial space stations, and those have evolved a lot, partly as companies realize how difficult it is and how expensive it is. There are a few companies who will launch much smaller modules, but for the moment, the only alternative, China has a small space station. It's about the third of the size of the ISS in low Earth orbit. And then there are other countries, India, Europe is talking about having a low Earth orbit space station. What we're very worried about is if that stopped, having a loss of all of that expertise. We are very hopeful for some form of continuity, keeping the ISS going as long as possible, because it's so precious, it teaches us so much, and having some form of continuity. So we're in active discussions with partners around the world. What can we do to make sure that there's some form of public platform for space science, for astronauts to go to? We learn so much from it to keep a continuous human presence. That's been going, as you mentioned, for 25 years. We want to keep that going, but right now it's not obvious what the successors will be. And it's a big leap. If that stopped, to go from there to deep space is a very big leap. So you'd want to keep that know-how, muscle memory going as long as possible. It's also very beneficial for our companies. It's from that we launch science experiments, that they have access to space science. D'autres choses? No?
So just to follow up on that concern with regards to the International Space Station, what is CSA's official position? To prolong it or to deorbit it in 2031?
Yeah, there's the Canadian Space Agency received, and we're very grateful for it, additional funding to participate up until 2030. But at some point with spacecraft, and you heard my colleague mention some of our satellites, we've kept them for 23 years. So we have a mission life of 5 years, but we keep them for much longer, which we're very proud of, which might sound responsible from a return on investment. The only issue is increasingly we need to plan for deorbit. So save enough fuel so that you can do a controlled re-entry, just as we saw with Artemis 2. Their re-entry was controlled. Reached 3,000 degrees as plasma burned up around them and parachutes. Same thing with the International Space Station. We have to make sure that there's enough control over the International Space Station to be able to deorbit it responsibly. You may have seen some of the issues with space debris lately, and so a controlled re-entry is the most important thing. Will the structure last until that long? I mentioned the persistent leak on the Russian module. That's a problem. We're doing what we can to maintain it. Will other issues arise as the structure ages? We hope not. We're doing as much preventative maintenance, but it is already reaching beyond what we anticipated when we first launched it.
Are you aware of any third alternate solutions? So not just an International Space Station and not deorbiting it in 2031, but has private enterprise inquired to the CSA or NASA or any other international space agency just to keep the ISS up there in space?
Since I remember, since 2020, commercial organizations have been active in either using a portion of the International Space Station to create something else, launching their own space station. There have been a number of proposals. None of them have gotten very far, although we may see some changes this year with much smaller modules launched, but not a full station. So the idea of creating something like the International Space Station at that size, we haven't seen that yet. It's been much smaller scale, and often where they have difficulty is what is the business plan? Who will the market be? Is it government? Is there a private market for this? At the moment, it's still very expensive, and so they seem to be wrestling with that. But India has spoken about launching their own space station and welcoming international partners. Europe has spoken of that as well.
Thank you.
But it is a complex endeavor.
Thank you. Time is up, and we will proceed to MP Ellison for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Like many who, at the age of 6 watched the first human moon landing, was very excited to see a Canadian on a mission, towards the moon. NASA has said that they are planning crewed missions to the moon again. Is there are there plans that I don't necessarily mean committing astronauts, but is the CSA participating in the development of these missions to land crews on the moon?
We are part of something called the Artemis Accords, which is a political agreement of now 66 countries for deep space. And Canada is one of the first countries. We also hosted the second workshop on the Artemis Accords. And now 66 countries are planning for a permanent presence on the moon. The moon is a challenging environment. There's a dust called regolith that gets in absolutely everything. It can be minus 200 or plus 100 Celsius. So planning for the batteries, trying to survive a lunar night, which can be 14 days in the minus 200. Now, Canadians are pretty good at that, but the moon is a whole different story. And then it's an unforgiving environment. There's also really rough terrain, constructing vehicles that can go down into canyons and not tip over. And actually achieving a lunar landing, there have been some commercial entities who have tried, and some of them have crashed into the moon. So slowing down enough so that you can actually do a soft landing on the moon is very challenging. But yes, Canada is very much part of that. We're sought after for our robotics. We've been investing for years in surface mobility, so we're ready for this now. We've engaged with 3 companies for both the mission concept and also 5 companies for the science that we would do on the moon. And NASA is very much looking for international partners, not only because they want it to be an international endeavor, but also, quite frankly, for financial reasons. They need the contributions of other countries.
All right, thank you. Now, further to that, once we're actually there, is there a plan for what kind of research is going to be done on the moon, and what are the possible, scientific and industrial potentials of such research?
We're all very interested in the south pole of moon because we think there's water ice there, which we could use to live, but also use to convert for hydrogen to go to further into the solar system, to Mars and beyond. But also the moon geology was mentioned earlier. The moon used to be part of Earth, and we can learn a lot about Earth from studying the moon. And you might have heard, if you listen to the Artemis II crew, they saw parts of the moon. They saw micrometeorites hitting it that human eyes have never seen. So there is tremendous amount of science. There are also resources. There are companies and countries who are very interested in the resources on the moon. And we're doing our very best to make sure that it's a collaborative endeavor with interoperability. That'll be important. D'autres choses sur la science?
You cover.
C'est bon.
All right, and I'm going to cede the rest of my time to Madame Briere.
Thank you, MP Ellison. Merci beaucoup pour toutes ces réponses. Justement, vous...
Thank you for these answers. You are opening the door. The University of Sherbrooke is working on a very important project on a small rover, and the mission was cancelled. But it was the first launch out of 3 for the Canadarm3 and the rover, the utility vehicle. So isn't it unfortunate to have taken away the financing of this after all the financing that was done for this? And I think you've also mentioned that they were supposed to go and go to the South Pole of the moon. Aren't we losing international Canadian leadership here? Yes, of course. It's always sad to make such difficult decisions. But we are very aware that this is taxpayers' money and we have to use it in a responsible way. We were told to find $41.3 million in savings. We did this and we had to stop that project because we had realized that there might be budgetary and deadline issues. And with the request to tighten our belts, we had to do this. But science will continue. Nevertheless, there are new companies. There's one in Sherbrooke that are doing absolutely extraordinary work that are using the magnetosphere of the Earth in order to be able to have very secure maps. And it's amazing. I visited them a little while ago, and what they're doing is absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you. And with that, we will proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5.
Nous allons maintenant.
Vous avez dit 2 minutes et demie, Madame la Présidente.
You said 2.5 minutes, Chair, so not 6 minutes?
The third round, we are... We are into the third round.
Oui.
So you will have 2.5 minutes.
OK.
Yeah.
D'accord, merci.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Campbell, the Castor and the Cosmological Ultraviolet Telescope is seen as a historical opportunity for Canada to lead an international space mission. Does the agency support this mission, and has it asked the government for $20 million in order to undertake the first phase of the project? It's a dilemma at the current time. We're supporting it. It's a great project. And if we had unlimited funding, of course, there are two other projects, however, that are interesting us. Lightbird with Japan. If you could answer my question, will Castor strengthen Canada's scientific sovereignty by doing Arctic observation and by processing a lot of data? Of course, there are advantages. So if this decision is postponed to not fund Castor, do you think that Canada risks losing international partners, and it will also miss an opportunity to demonstrate leadership in space missions internationally? At the current time, we don't have any funding for this project. And so you say that you support it, but you have mixed feelings. Will you ask the government to provide more funding to fund this project in the future? I would say that we have a lot of dreams for the projects that we'd like to fund, but we can't fund them all. So I'm trying to help you. The government has found $82 million over 5 years for defense, but they can't find $20 million to fund this project. And you spoke to us about a $40 million cut. So my question, does the Canadian government recognize that space is also a major issue in terms of sovereignty and defense? I think we've made a good investment with the James Webb Telescope. It was significant, and it was a great mission with us and with NASA and the ESA. In the future, there will be investment opportunities, including Castor. There are other opportunities, and there are benefits for all of these projects. As you mentioned, Castor is fully Canadian. The community supports it, and the other one has an international component. So what did the government say to you when you asked about this project? Well, we haven't asked them about it. We're talking to the science sector. Well, you said that there's not enough money. Did they say no? No, we receive our funding in advance. There's a great deal of preparatory work, and for this project, it's still in preparation, as far as I know. Well, I'm the people who are working in the area tell me that everything's ready, and it's just a question of money. That's why I'm asking you questions, and I'd like you to answer them.
Blanche Jonka, and now we will proceed to MP Ho for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back to my previous round about the gender-based analysis done on the selection of Jeremy Hansen. Could the CSA table that, or do you have that information? Do you know if a gender-based analysis was conducted before the selection?
Provide additional information if you're interested on the specific amounts spent. But I would add that it's probably part of our overall recruitment strategy.
I'd just like to know within 30 days if you could table that, yes or no, whether there was a gender-based analysis conducted before the selection of Jeremy Hansen for Artemis 2. That's all.
We'll get back to
as
the
well as the
members.
previous question. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So moving on. So we learned that the Liberal government spent $200 million to sign a 10-year lease for a spaceport in Nova Scotia. And you talked about this briefly earlier. But could you elaborate a little bit more to this committee about the partnerships involved in this deal and specifically the role played by the Ukrainian Space Agency and the Maritime Launch Services?
Second, please, if I may. So our roles to support the broader space ecosystem, I mentioned the meeting that I was at in 2021 with the State Space Agency of Ukraine, but since then, with Spaceport Nova Scotia, we have not been involved. So we're not responsible for funding Spaceport Nova Scotia. That investment was announced by the Department of National Defense. However, we have funded rocket technology. Our role is truly in the technology part of it, and then also the in-space activities.
I mean, pictures of the space pad looks more like an undeveloped gravel pit. Many people have been there, and it looks like just a parking lot. Do you think it's a good value for taxpayers to lease this for $200 million for 10 years?
Comment on that and not having seen the photo or been there recently.
Oh, so you've never been there?
I was there in 2021, but not at the spaceport. It was in Halifax to meet with the State Space Agency of Ukraine, who came to talk about bringing their rockets to Canada.
You have a great deal of experience in procurement in your career as a civil servant. I mean, does that, looking at pictures of the gravel pit, does that pass your gut check if it's worth $200 million?
So I'm not sure what pictures are being referred to, but
When do you expect the next sort of the successful orbital launch would be from the space pad?
we were just at an event with the Reaction Dynamics, one of the companies whose rocket hybrid technology we're helping fund, and I know there's hope to have a rocket launch from Canada by 2028. That's the goal. I think I mentioned that earlier.
I want to just clarify what the role of the Ukrainian Space Agency in this, because you mentioned it a couple times, so I just want to understand, like, what were we relying on the Ukrainian Space Agency on in this?
Be bringing, and it probably won't be able to happen now because of the war, but they were going to be bringing mid-sized Ukrainian rockets, so proven rocket technology, in a partnership with the spaceport Maritime Launch Services. I know that stopped, but I think the company
Before the war, understandably, in 2021.
Exactly.
Understand. Okay,
Yeah.
I understand that part, but the Ukrainian Space Agency has suffered doesn't have the best record. I mean, it suffered a series of losses, of scandals, mismanagement, malfeasance, and corruption. It's got a 10-year project that failed in Brazil. It's got allegations of deals with North Korea, breach of contract case with Boeing that would cost the company $200 million, and theft of over $10 million from Export Development Canada. So do you think that from your perspective, how confident were you that they were going to deliver on the technology that Canada depends on?
At the time, what was of interest, and again, we were simply there to support space agency to space agency. At the time, what was of interest was proven rocket technologies. In other words, rockets that had flown, had executed on the mission. That is, at the time, there wasn't that many in the world who could do that, and having that partnership would have helped the company. That was the purpose of it.
All those things I just mentioned was already uncovered before 2021. So it doesn't look like they have a good record of delivering. And so at that time, do you think it's, looking back on this decision, do you think it was do you think you were confident they're going to deliver on this, given the series of scandals and mismanagement, and whether or not?
I'm not familiar with what you're referring to, sir. I just know that at the time the intent was to use a proven rocket.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like you're familiar with a lot. Thank you.
We'll go to MP Dandura. I hope I pronounced your name properly for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup et merci à vous.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here with us today and for speaking to us about this fascinating area. And I believe that Canada is a leader in this area. It's very inspiring to have you here with us and to be able to ask you questions. So I'd like to hear from you about the currently unstable geopolitical context and the importance, in your opinion, of having sovereign capacity in terms of space capacity. And in another area, how are we positioning ourselves given the emergence of satellite constellations which are private? It's becoming more competitive. But what's great is that in the beginning, it was just public space agencies. There were about 12 of them, and Canada was able to stand out among the first ones. Now there are private companies which are viable. That's wonderful. There's growth, but it means that it's more congested. There are more operators. There's more space debris. And so the need to operate responsibly is more and more important for everyone in order to preserve this important environment. Also, our modern society depends on space infrastructure. Not a day goes by where we don't use space to access banks, for credit cards, for all the systems that we use on Earth. I mentioned a Canadian company that's trying to create the internet in space because the current ocean-based system is more and more fragile, and we'd like to strengthen this system. We're depending more and more on invisible space infrastructure. It's very important to us. There's also space exploration to go further. And of course, the low Earth environment needs to remain peaceful and predictable, and we're constantly monitoring space debris. We share the data with our partners. We share our flight plans with so that everything's coordinated. Thank you. And I still have a number of other questions, but you've made me think of another question. I come from the Eastern Townships, which has a number of cell connectivity issues. And so is satellite capacity a future solution? And if it's the case, how long do you think it will be until we're able to deploy service in rural areas, in the mountainous areas? And how will this all work? And definitely is what I would say. And of course, security. I spoke about our quantum mission. Currently, our methods aren't working, and we'll need a quantum technology to make our technology secure. And so we want to move forward this technology and test it in space. I also mentioned the Hydrogen project, which will create communication, optical communication from space. It'll be much more reliable. Yes, we're currently developing satellites which will allow us to use direct devices that will allow us to communicate directly from satellites to cell phones. So this will increase connectivity. And that's in terms of cell phones and in terms of internet. There are already technologies available that we can buy from the Americans. And there's companies like Telesat who are developing sovereign capacity. And there are technologies that the agency is helping to develop. So this will allow us to access high-speed internet everywhere in the Eastern Townships, but also everywhere in Canada, including the Arctic. So in the same vein, speaking of rural areas, this satellite capacity could help us in precision agriculture so that food costs less to produce. And could this help us predict natural disasters like forest fires? Is this the kind of concrete application that could be used on a daily basis that your research could be helpful in? We're already doing that kind of thing with our satellites. They're very useful for precision agriculture, for biodiversity. There are many terrestrial applications. And we know that there's a lot of demand for these products. It's integrated in agricultural practices, and it will allow better water management. And I'd like to ask you one last question, and perhaps we could receive a written response. Thank you.
With MP D. Ritter for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, MP D. Ritter.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. Campbell. How are you? I'm good, thank you. I just wanted to confirm, did the government do any sort of review with you before they put forward the business case and the numbers before committing to the spaceport project?
You weren't involved in that.
Whatsoever?
Not involved in that, no.
So basically Canadians are being asked to trust the government's calculations with no real consultation to what's supposed to be happening there?
I can't comment on that. I can just go back to the work we did in 2021, as I mentioned, and the work we've done investing in rocket technologies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Pidbuff, I hope I said your name correctly. Pardon? Pidbuff, sorry. Is it fair to say that this facility still cannot operate without significant development infrastructure work?
The spaceport?
Yeah, the spaceport.
It still needs development, but it's the case for any spaceport that is being developed. So the spaceport is to prepare to launch a rocket. So you need to develop that, and that's what they are doing now.
That's really been completed to date.
But
yeah,
this is the development they are doing right now.
Okay. How much of that technology and infrastructure is going to be dependent on foreign expertise or technology?
For me?
Yes.
It's It's not so much foreign expertise. Basically, it's the building, the expertise is known, the knowledge is known. So we have that in Canada. It's really not to build the spaceport and to be able to launch that. And so...
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, and so we have the expertise in Canada to do so.
And do you know if that's going to be the case, that they're going to use Canadian expertise in technology and infrastructure and brains to put it all together, or do you think?
That's my expectation. As the President Campbell mentioned, we have not been involved directly in the discussion, but yes, my expectation is will be Canadian expertise that will be used to develop that.
Do you know if there's been any sort of commitment or contract signed to date? No. Okay. I'm going to go back to you, Ms. Campbell. Do you know if there's any sort of success indicators for the $200 million investment into the Launchpad, the spaceport project?
For us, the indicators of success with all space projects are that you can get to space and that you can operate once you're there. So these rocket technologies that we've been investing in, what we're trying to do is de-risk them, bring them from a low technology readiness level, sometimes test them in a near space environment. I mentioned our stratospheric balloon campaigns, and then get them to space and back. We're also increasingly seeing reusable rockets, which is a great thing. Rather than flying them once, have reusable, repeatable, create supply chains, and have that resilience from space. That's the goal, and it would be great if we had it in Canada.
But again, you haven't been consulted and have no oversight or look into the actual development of the spaceport project and the $200 million. So your indicator isn't really tied to the $200 million that the government has currently invested for a concrete pad. Is that fair to say?
I don't know if it is. I just know I'm just sharing what the Canadian Space Agency looks for when we try and advance technologies.
So right now, as it stands, taxpayers have committed to funding a project, it looks like, before any sort of commercial demand was proven or gone through your department. Can I accurately say that there's been no real analysis through any sort of consultation on this $200 million and this spaceport project today?
If I could just add a bit of a nuance when you say no consultation. So we've actually been investing in rocket technology for some years in anticipation that the U.S. has become crowded. So they're coastal spaceports. There's literally traffic jams. They're actually looking at inland spaceports, which is a terrible idea because it's close to populations. Canada is a natural place to have spaceports. And so we were ready and trying to invest in the technologies so that when there is sovereign space launch, our companies are ready to have launch from Canadian soil.
Yeah, so you keep going back to the rockets themselves, and I keep referencing the project in the $200 million, taxpayer investment. So I just want to really, I guess my goal here is to get on record that you're not engaged with the actual infrastructure. Okay, thank you. And the $200 million taxpayers have asked to spend to build it, and it's not being built. That has nothing to do with your agency.
No.
Thank you. With that, we will go to MP Noor Mohammed for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, MP Noor Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can begin with Ms. Campbell. The conversations that have been going on today, I think, range from how you select astronauts all the way through to some of the more relevant questions that people might want answered. I'd be curious, what are some of the things that you think when you see a group of parliamentarians like this? What are some of the things that we should be focusing on in terms of the conversation that we should be having in respect of where the Canadian Space Agency? Sorry, Madam Chair, Mr. Ho appears to think that interrupting is the best way to conduct himself.
One speaker at a time. Floor is with MP Noor Mohammed. It is his time. So MP Noor Mohammed, please go ahead.
Point of order. I think he should take his own advice on that member should take his own advice. Thank you.
Noor Mohammed.
Thank you. So instead of waging DEI battles, let's actually have a conversation about what matters. One of the things that I think Canadians would be interested in knowing is when you think about the future of the space program for this country, Madam Chair.
Sorry, for interrupting. I'll stop your clock, please. I'm requesting all the members that a person who has the floor, please allow them to ask their questions and answers. You can speak when you have the floor. Thank you. MP
I'm going to get my time back, though, right, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you.
4 minutes.
So, again, the opposition would like to wage DEI battles. I'd be curious in talking to you about the future of the space program in this country. And I think Canadians would like to know. Obviously, the Prime Minister's laid out a fairly ambitious agenda for where he would like Canada to be going. There's a defense industrial strategy now in place. The reality is that there's a variety of different factors that now come into play. What is the one thing that you would like parliamentarians to be focusing on as we think about the future of the Canadian Space Agency, and in particular, what we should be thinking about in respect of space and Canada's role in where space programming and where true engagement in terms of how we think about growth and how we think about exploration goes?
Thank you. And thank you all for the time today. We are grateful to be here and be able to share with you a little bit about what we do. Canada's space program is extraordinary. We are one of the original spacefaring nations, and now we're one of more than 90 who are involved in space. So it's much more competitive, but we remain one of the original spacefaring nations who can provide capabilities that are operated in space. It also provides tremendous potential for our country. Space saves lives, and it saves money. With the perspective of space, you can do things here on Earth that would take you much more time, much more resources to do, like manage agriculture, biodiversity, disaster management, Arctic infrastructure. Space has solutions for those. It also has a return on investment that's extraordinary. I mentioned some of the statistics earlier. For each dollar we invest in Canadian companies, it creates high-quality jobs, 28,000 at the moment. I think it's probably even broader than that. And the space sector has been incredibly resilient through the pandemic, growing at a rate of 15%, as I mentioned. So I hope that after our discussion today, you'll see the potential of Canada's space program. It's very strong. It really does help us in what we're trying to do as a nation, but we're also sought after as a partner on the world stage. We're very reliable. We will stay with our international partners, help them work through problems, and ultimately achieve success together. That's why we keep getting asked to do these incredible space missions. We also have a rich science ecosystem. Mention was made of astronomy missions. There is so much more that we could do together, and it could accomplish multiple goals. Space technology is dual use, so there is a way to invest in this and also bring back benefits here on Earth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much time do I have left?
1 minute and 40 seconds.
So I did have a number of other questions I wanted to ask you, but regrettably, I do actually have to move a motion, so I'm now going to do that. But I want to thank you for the insightful response to that question. I do want to move a motion that was put on notice earlier, and the motion reads, notwithstanding the motion adopted on February 12th, 2026, on the disclosure of documents related to the AI strategy, and given that the estimate provided by ICID officials for the cost of production of these materials ranges from $1,192,493.59 to $1,327,208.59, and given that all AI Strategy Task Force reports and more than 11,000 submissions from the public have been proactively disclosed, the committee rescinded the order for the production of documents adopted on February 12th, 2026. So I need to move that motion now, obviously, and recognizing that all the materials that were requested in that study are now available, and they are available online to anybody that wants them. It renders the direction of the committee moot. So I would put that on the floor now.
Thank you. We have a motion by MP Noor Mohammed on the floor. MP Baldinelli.
Madam Chair, before we vote on this, I just want to express my disappointment that the Minister's office, and particularly the department, continually indicated that they would not provide a cost breakdown of the estimate that they provided to this committee. I mean, how can we as parliamentarians vote to rescind the motion when we have no idea what the true costs are? I repeatedly asked for the cost breakdown, and they, the Minister's office, and departmental officials have repeatedly refused to provide that. I mean, sadly, I believe this is an affront to every parliamentarian who sits here. I ask that this information be shared with all members, by way of you, Chair. Again, they refused I mean, it leads to the question, what are they trying to hide? I was just asking for a cost breakdown of that dollar figure that my colleague had provided. So ultimately, we're going to vote on this, and the Liberals have the numbers, and we'll vote to rescind. But again, I mean, I think it's an insult to every parliamentarian here. I simply had a question of what were the cost breakdown for that money being spent. I don't want to spend exorbitant amount of dollars on materials if we don't have to. But again, I think what's more insulting is the simple fact that they would not even provide a breakdown of what those costs entailed. So unfortunately, we will be voting against this.
Thank you, MP Baldinelli. MP Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to set the record straight on a couple of things because my friend opposite, I call him my friend because I do think of him in that way. And I've had this conversation on several occasions. He has also met with individuals from the minister's office who explained to him the frustration that we have also had in respect of getting information from the department in respect of the breakdown. Notwithstanding the above, we know exactly what the cost range is. But more importantly, Madam Chair, what we also know is that the information that the committee sought to find is now available publicly, 11,000 different submissions. So I'm not entirely certain why there would be feigned outrage for information that is actually now available in the public domain. And if folks are having a difficult time finding it, I will be glad to ensure that anybody that wants it has access to it. But the reality here is that there's over $1 million in cost to find for this committee stuff that is actually available in the form that it was previously submitted. So to be able to repackage it and to repackage it so that it addresses whatever it is that the opposition wants at a cost of $1.2 million or $1.3 million seems a bit of a waste of taxpayer dollars. And given that they speak about being the so-called party of fiscal prudence, I think they would be the ones that would be aghast that government would be asked to spend money to package something in a way that they wanted packaged. The information is available. It's available to them. I would be glad to share it again with my colleagues if they would like it. But the idea that we would somehow be wasting money and now time to discuss this seems absolutely, absolutely bananas.
Thank you. MP Ho. Yeah, well, next.
I find it, first of all, I just want to look at this estimate that we were given. It's not a range like, it's going to cost roughly $1 to $1.3 million. It's a very specific number. It is $1,192,493.59 to $1,327,208.59. I mean, it gets to the cent. So clearly, there is a precise breakdown that we were not provided. All we wanted was a precise breakdown of these numbers. And so it wasn't like a ballpark figure like, it's going to cost like $1 to $1.3 million, something like that. It's a very specific number. It's a very precise number, all the way to the penny. So, again, we just want to know what's being hidden here in terms of the costs, and the cost breakdown. And another, the Liberal member said, okay, well, we got all the information's already public. Well, if it's already public, then why is it costing this much? So there's got to be a little more there than what's already public, because why would it cost that much? Okay, I'll cede the floor.
I have a speaking list, so we'll come to you. MP Blanchet-Jonca.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Veuillez bien noter cette date, 25 mai 2026, une autre tentative.
May 25th, 2026. This date represents another attempt on the part of the Liberal government to hide its responsibilities. And I'm talking about cost because I'm the one who submitted the motion to have the list of people who submitted memoranda in the context of consultation for Canada's AI strategy. Madam Chair, we even had the minister here when I submitted this motion in February. And as if it was arranged behind the scenes, he gave us on the website the same day he testified to the committee, because he knew we were waiting for the list that I had requested. And remember, the government, it was a minority government at the time, so they had no choice but to accept. But the answer, Madam Chair, for the people who are listening to us, is that the government itself had refused the motion asking for the public to know who would participate in the consultation for supposedly the most important strategy in the history of Canada, the digital and AI strategy. So, to summarize the situation, the government said it's important for you to participate in public consultations when we're talking about strategic matters like AI, but it's not important for you to know who will participate. That's what our colleague is saying today. He's trying to make us believe that it's all available online. Madam Chair, if it was available online, we wouldn't have requested it. Simple as that. And you know what? Online, first, we don't have the 11,000 people. That's false. I invite my colleague, and I'll be very happy to retract if I'm wrong, but we don't have that at all. And you know what's more important, Madam Chair? It's not just knowing who participated, but knowing what they said. And that we don't know either. So I'll challenge my colleague to say, what did they say? Is it really available for taxpayers, for Canadians, for Quebecers? The answer is no, Madam Chair. So the government wants to build an AI strategy, but doesn't want to say who participated and influenced it in its decision-making process and what they said. Madam Chair, normally, my mom always told me, Maxime, if it's good, no need to hide it. No worries, but the government is saying no. You don't have to know. I'm worried, Madam Chair, and that's why I'm taking the time to explain that to the people listening attentively.
Conflit avec.
There were potential conflicts with the government itself and its partners at the international level. Attempts at foreign interference through strategies like the AI strategies. And this wasn't brought up by me. This has been explained to journalists many times that there are people attempting to interfere, and we have an opaque process. We have a government that doesn't want to make the contents of consultations public, but that doesn't want to make even the list of participants public. So I'm more and more worried when it comes to this type of process. And imagine that we had to have a parliamentary committee and an MP, myself, asking the government through a motion to disclose who participated in this consultation and what these people said. So today we're told, trust us, but we won't tell you what they said. Trust us, but we won't know who told us these things. I find that pretty incredible on the part of a government that calls itself responsible to not transmit the crucial information of who participated, what they said, and what the government itself will conclude from this consultation. And for me, it all comes back to the question of transparency, especially in a democratic system. You know as well as I do, Madam Chair, that the transparency doesn't mean much for this Liberal government. The first government to create a majority mid-legislature. And I'm explaining this to the listener. We had a minority government after the general elections of April 2025, and it managed to convince MPs from other parties to make them cross the floor. And, Madam Chair, what that did, that allowed the government to obtain a majority. And in reality, it's undemocratic because it doesn't respect the will of the population. The government said, yes, we're respecting traditions. Well, from what I understand, there's a tradition in Canada, which is to say elections, and elections decide if the government is a minority or majority government and which parties will be in power. And the government is ignoring that and saying,
usage de la Chambre qui donne.
It's the rules and customs of the House that allow us to have a majority government. Madam Chair, that's unusual. Never has that happened in more than 150 years. a government has never obtained a majority through floor crossers. That is incredible. So I think people need to remember that, because in terms of anti-democratic actions, that is quite noteworthy. But we have another example here in committee. Access to data is refused. And the strategy, I find it pretty intelligent on the part of the government. They say it'll be too expensive. Madam Chair, knowing the truth in Canada is too expensive. It's too expensive. So I like numbers, and I did a little calculation. The last budget, the Prime Minister is an expert in finance, and his last budget has a $78 billion deficit, the biggest deficit in history. We're beating records, not positive records. We have a record deficit, 78 billion, and then a colleague is slam dunk argument is, I'll tell people it costs too much to know the truth. So I calculated the amount estimated by the colleague, spending projected by the federal budget for 2025-2026. How much do you think? 586 billion. So we're talking about 1 million, which is supposedly the hypothetical number. He heard that behind the scenes, drinking his coffee and discussing with the minister's office and the translation bureau. So 1 million over 586 billion, how much? 0.000017%. Let's repeat for those listening, 0.00017%. So for our colleague and the government's team, that is too much. They're saying people won't pay 1 million, and that seems like a lot, 1 million. But let's put that in proportion. This amount will allow us to know the truth. First of all, are there people who are trying to take advantage of the strategy for private interests? We can't know because we don't have access to the data. Imagine parliamentarians, MPs elected by the population cannot know who participated in a public consultation requested by the government. Madam Chair, that's no longer a public consultation if the data is not public. I would call that a communications operation to manipulate public opinion and to manipulate the population. And once again, I'm astounded that our colleague is saying that it will cost too much. Here in Quebec, the motto is I remember. I remember that last time there was the same strategy that was used by the government when I made a request to know the requests for financing that were approved or refused. My request was very simple. I wanted to know if there were unbalances in research funding in Canada. And our colleague said, having access to data will cost too much. It'll cost too much to know if we can analyze data from the public money distributed for scientific projects. You see, Madam Chair, it's the same strategy, it's the same mechanism. For the government, the cost of truth is too high. So I want people to understand what is going on currently, which in my opinion is something catastrophic, unsound, toxic, and totally unacceptable in a democratic system. Once again, as I said, I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised, because the government that
toute l'importance de la science, qui est notamment
obtained a majority through floor crossers, I'm not surprised. And it comes back to the importance of science, which is supposedly a great preoccupation for this government. The head science advisor who had come in last November had expressed reservations about the government's so-called national interest projects. Listen to the parallel. The government says it's important. We're confronted with the worst tariff crisis in the history of Canada. So we need to be proactive to promote certain projects. And these projects, Madam Chair, who will decide them? How will they be decided? For the government, it's not important. We need projects, so we need projects. If the projects are good, it should be demonstrated. But the head science advisor, you know what she said? Allow me to repeat. She had not been consulted as far as these projects were concerned. That's kind of funny, Madam Chair. We recruit someone for her to develop expertise with her team, and when the time comes to make decisions, she's not consulted. Listen, I found it unfortunate for her, first of all, but especially unfortunate for taxpayers. What's the use of paying people if ultimately they're not listened to? Of course, I believe in science, not just in terms of PR and press conferences. But I think it demonstrated once again that this government is speaking out of both sides of its mouth, and it's demonstrated this many times over. I'll give many examples, have a very factual approach. Another thing, Madame la Présidente.
Release our witnesses.
I can check with the witnesses. It's 5:30. I know we started the meeting a bit late, so we started at 3:43. You are okay with the time to stay here, or you would like to leave because of some other commitments?
We're always happy to stay and talk about space. Thank you, if that's helpful to the committee.
Blanche Jonca
Great.
has the
Awesome.
floor.
Love it. Let's talk about space.
Good. Blanche
Love that.
Jonca.
Let's talk about space.
Oui, Madame la Présidente, pour les...
Madam Chair, for the people of the CSA, I have got great respect for them. And I think it's really unfortunate because I had to say something, because it is my colleague here who tabled this motion for something that happened in February. And now he tells us on May 25th that he asks us for a request that had nothing to do with the study. And I think it's really unfortunate. But if you don't mind, when it comes to science and research, I can talk about the importance of the investments that the government makes.
We have of that motion before we get into the discussion. So, MP Blanche Jonca, you have the floor.
D'accord.
And if you would like to continue speaking on the motion.
Bien sûr, Madame la Présidente. Alors, le gouvernement nous dit que ça coûte trop cher. Mais pourtant...
The government says it's too expensive. But yet, what did we see in the last budget? We had cuts of more than $30 million to the CSA. And so these are mums and dads that are going to lose their job. These are projects that are going to go nowhere. And then we have a PM who's an expert in finance, and he says, well, we're very proud that there is a Canadian astronaut that participated in a space mission. But at the same time, we're cutting the very financing of the very organization that permitted that astronaut to develop professionally. Is that not a lack of coherence? Is this not contradictory? So we love you, but we're cutting you. I know that fruits and vegetables are good for your health, and I eat them every day. It's really that simple. It seems very simplistic, I know, but it's the same thing. When you say, if you want the effort in your garden to get somewhere, you need to water your garden. But the garden isn't being watered by the government, is it? They're cutting the water to the garden. And it's not just the CSA, it's in all of government that this is happening. But when it comes to tell us we have money for projects, all of a sudden we've got money. So, and this, Madam Chair, is what I'm trying to say as a parallel to the motion. If it is too costly to look at the truth to get data and information, then in the future it would be important to develop solutions so that this doesn't happen anymore. Because in this committee, we've got two concrete examples. We've got one example on we know that what was refused, and I know that it was me who had actually asked for the motion for access to data, because we know that researchers who are accredited researchers could not get access to data. Are we in North Korea or are we in Canada? And researchers can't get access to data on the financing that was given to scientific projects that were given to subsidized organizations. Completely amazing that I'm even obliged to say this to you. And those researchers came here to this committee and said, oh, yeah, it's true, we can't do our work because the government is refusing to give us access to the scientific data. So then I went to the government and said, please give us this data. And they said, no, it's too sensitive. It's access to private life and all that. I said, fine, but could you at least not create a mechanism so that they can have access to the data? And they went, no, finally, no, we don't have the right software, the right system. So you see how circular this is? This is endless. It's an endless loop. So they have us through exhaustion. So you can't do your work and there's no accountability. So imagine, Madam Chair, imagine the people who are managing the research science projects in Canada. They themselves have to do their own evaluation on the inside. There's no outside analysis whatsoever. So that, for people who understand things, this is good. It's like if, the hockey team says, oh, I'm going to choose these people to check us out, these arbiters. So the government, with its organizations, are going to carry out their own internal analysis. And they say, trust us. It's public money. It's taxpayers' money. You don't need access to this data. Well, this really worries me, Madam Chair. This worries me because there's a lot of people who are worried in the scientific community because they cannot have access to this data. So once again, okay, we're talking about another subject. We're talking about AI. So AI is supposed to be the big workhorse for the government, and we're told this is a huge priority. We're going to invest, and we're going to invest record amounts. But they don't want to say who participated. Who participated to this public consultation and how? Were these people influenced in any way in order to participate? Did anyone have indirect links with government representatives in order to be able to put things within that public consultation? And I remember the minister in charge came here to testify in committee, and he said he was very, very proud of this said consultation because, in his opinion, it had been the largest public consultation in the history of Canada. And when he said this during committee, Madam Chair, I was actually surprised. Because I said to myself, how is it that if this is the biggest operation, how is it not that he was not better prepared? And who was going to participate? And also, were we going to inform the population of anything? I understand that 11,000 people participating is a lot of people, and it's going to take a lot of time to get everything together. But I ask myself, if the government cannot get this information to us, parliamentarians, to see what was said, well, how can we carry out our job? And also, Madam Chair, I would like to quote a few people who had been very worried on the issue of AI and strategy. There were people who wrote to us, I can tell you, as a member of parliament when we carried out the study on artificial intelligence. And they were worried about the how. How is this new federal government strategy going to be deployed, unveiled? How was it going to be presented? So I recall that this was done fairly quickly. And so there were 6 months that happened between the conclusion of the quote unquote consultations, which were accelerated that Minister Solomon had promised. And this was a promise made by the federal government.
Il avait déclaré aussi, Madame la Présidente.
And he had also stated, Madam Chair, last fall, that Canada could not allow itself to wait any longer, and we needed to act right now. And the minister had apologized. on the delay. So I find this rather amazing. So they say they're so in a hurry to carry out this AI strategy. They can't inform parliamentarians or the population as to the price of it. And the minister, Madam Chair, had also said that according to him, the impact of AI has evolved and it'll continue to evolving. And we're going to have to continue to meet all of the people who were consulted with. He'd also talked about recent meetings with different leaders, environmental leaders, union leaders, and more. And listen, and this also surprised me. So he said during the consultations, the minister said, you know, this is about things are coming to an end, and things are evolving, and the strategy has to respond to the changing nature of the world of work. And Madam Chair, I would like to know what was said within the strategy and who was able to influence the government's decisions. So this public consultation gathered more than 11,000 comments that we cannot have access to. So this is what we're talking about today. And the government also said that with AI, they proceeded to analyze said comments. The minister also mentions that Canada would abandon its over-indexation in warnings to make for the economy in artificial intelligence. It also says that the situation has evolved a great deal since the consultation. Things are very clear, and the government itself admits that things are moving at breakneck speed. And I remind you that in the last legislation, the government did not manage to get its own bill passed to frame AI. So basically, we're doing a consultation. It's not clear. It's not transparent either in the data that is gathered. The government says it wants to set up a strategy quickly, but they're delaying it. And then finally, they say this government strategy was done with consultants, and perhaps just as I'm about to launch this strategy, things will have changed so much it's actually no good anymore and it's obsolete. And so what we see here is we have a cognitive dissonance here, and from a point of view of legislation, they have not talked about. I know that we asked the minister, the deputy minister, about these inconsistencies. Let's say that there's a software that's developed and it actually threatens people's safety. Are we going to be able to stop it? They couldn't answer. Isn't that worrisome, Madam Chair? So they say AI is a super powerful tool and it can be used for the economy and developing the economy, but we can't stop it if it becomes harmful. Well, that actually really worries me. And in the meantime, we're told, oh, don't worry, we will unveil a strategy to counter this. So you see, Mr. Chair, this is what is important here. We need to understand as parliamentarians what all of this means. And I think all of the population is entitled to understand this. People have paid people who coordinated a public consultation, and somehow they're not allowed to find out what is contained within this public consultation. So I recall the discussions that we had in February before I tabled this motions, and our government colleagues here were trying to convince me that everything is available online. So, of course, I went to see what was available online. And Madam Chair, what did I see?
So, if you would like to, because we will have to continue with this, like once the debate collapses and we can have a vote. So, but if you would like to leave, you can. And I really want to, before you leave, I really want to thank you for appearing before the committee and providing your important input. Sorry for not allowing you to have full time to answer the questions, but thanks for coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
On behalf of all the members, thank you. So we'll go back to MP Blanchet-Jonca.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Alors, j'allais dire...
So what I was saying, Madam Chair, thank you, there were many criticisms that were made in the context of this public consultation, and the government did admit this. But I want to share a complaint that was made by one of the federal public unions of employees. They were saying that this was done too quickly in order to promote the interests of private companies and not the laws. So this was sent to Evan Solomon, and the union said that it wants to warn the minister that this AI strategy will probably not respond to the needs of workers and will not protect the collective interest. So not only was the consultation done too quickly, as the government admitted itself, but that big companies have monopolized the largest part of it, and that's what's important. And the working group that was appointed lacks representativity. So that's another point. So the government that are so good at public communications said yes, but will also create a parallel expert group
seats and allow the witnesses to leave because we have too much noise within the room. So thank you. And floor is with MP Blanchet-Jonca. Go ahead.
Aussi, l'enjeu sur le manque de représentation.
Also, the issue on the lack of representation or representativity of these experts. So the government in last October held some consultations, and they even created a working group that was in charge of implementing the strategy. I can confirm to you that we've never had any specifications as to how and who that was appointed or why and what manner. And it shows that the federal government was in a hidden and opaque situation, and they didn't even want to tell parliamentarians how they'd come up with all of this. So the union says here that the government named a person to represent CUPE within the AI strategy issue. And it also excluded several groups of experts in unions, civil society organizations, as well as AI researchers. So the people who are in charge of understand about governance of AI, rights of human rights, and so CUPE also asked to have a more representative and more equitable situation. Unfortunately, the government refused this request. So it's important to mention this. And this is CUPE wanted to draw Minister Solomon's attention to the consultation process and talking about the pan-Canadian strategy for AI. So the union was happy that one employee of CUPE was included in the strategy on AI, but nevertheless were worried about several of the elements that seem to compromise the inclusivity and the integrity of the process. So, if you'll allow me, it's a bit like it had already been planned with the guy behind the curtain to make sure that everybody felt shortchanged except for the people who were already appointed to participate. So in the union mentions in its letter that the consultation process meant that it's really difficult to participate. Many stakeholders from communities, notably those that are marginalized or underrepresented, who would have needed a longer period of time to study the documentation and consult their members and also get some enlightened answers. So me meant that rushing this process meant that we wouldn't get the full analysis. This is another thing that was mentioned by the union, is that they were worried about the lack of representation. So the composition of the group, which heavily weighed to industrial and commercial interests to the detriment of the public. And so if you'll allow me a little aside, they talked about after all, it is the public that paid for said consultation. It is the Canadian taxpayer who paid, and they are not allowed to find out who participated in this public consultation that was led by the government. This is quite worrisome. And it's also said in this letter that the actual makeup of this group was heavily inclined towards certain groups. The union, the CUPE, mentioned certain representatives, certain unions, and every sector of the market is going to be affected by this AI strategy. So it is necessary to have a larger spectrum of civil society, especially when it comes to matters of private life and civil liberties, human rights. So the task force would normally also look at hearing researchers who are listening to issues or are going to be talking about issues concerning AI and governance, but also discrimination in the systems of AI.
And of course, another important subject is data protection and privacy. And Madam Chair, these things concern me. So the lack of representativeness in these consultations questions the legitimacy and the authenticity of the federal government's intentions when it comes to AI. And this is not insignificant to the Canadian Union of Public Employees that represents government workers. Is questioning the government's authenticity in terms of wanting to have a committee that's representative and that benefits the public interest. Madam Chair, this is important. We've got people who think that the government, and this is what we're trying to verify today by accessing this data, is this to create advantages for certain groups, for certain individuals. We, as parliamentarians, are not able to do so because the government is refusing to provide us with the data.
Hours of the committee time. The clerk has checked in regards to the resources available. We have the resources available until 7 p.m. So that means 1 hour and 10 minutes more. So what is the will of the committee members? Do you like to continue or?
He has the floor. So.
Yeah. Sorry, MP Blanchet-Jonca has the floor, so committee cannot really decide what to do until someone brings in some motion. So MP Blanchet-Jonca.
Thank you, Chair, for reminding my colleagues of the importance of adhering to the standing orders. Sometimes it's not to their custom. And so I thought it was important to read this letter, Chair, because this shows that it's not only parliamentarians who were concerned by the way the government did these consultations and the way that it behaved by creating committees in parallel to favor curry public opinion. And we see again that the government is very adept when it comes to PR and in order to manipulate public opinion. And so we have another example in this file, which is a strategy which is extremely important to the government.
La consultation.
There are also a number of questions on the consultation in terms of commercialization. According to the Canadian Union of Public Employees, we will be creating advantage for large AI companies to the detriment of the broader public good. And of course, the economic considerations are important, but the union says that this shouldn't eclipse social concerns and those that concern workers, human rights, and communities. So the government should use a balanced approach in order to ensure that updating the Canada AI strategy be preventive in terms of the inherent risks that it could bring about. So the union is asking the government to ensure that the process is representative, and the consultation process should also be extended by improving the representativeness in terms of the bodies consulted on AI. The working group and the advisory council on AI, these subjects also bring up questions with respect to the risks associated with AI. So, Chair, you can imagine what the government's response was. Non-existent. The government did not extend the consultations, nor did it take a look at the makeup of this committee, which it appointed.
Le mémoire du syndicat.
So in the union's brief, with respect to the consultations on the 5 major areas, of course, we saw the important role of AI. And this is not insignificant. 800,000 members in this union, and it was stated publicly. So before answering the survey's questions on the federal AI strategy, they've decided it was important to discuss the questions that were missing that should have been included. Imagine, Chair, the government was consulting people, but the questions were prepared beforehand. And so this allowed the strategy to be oriented, and the government just wanted the consultations to end the way they wanted, and they did everything in their power so that this could be the case. The Canadian Union of Public Employees answered a number of additional questions, and they brought them up as questions that should have been included in the AI consultation. So, Chair, the first recommendation is that the federal government approve regulation or legislation to protect workers, to ensure the protection of data, and to mitigate climate change risks, as well as to do things to ensure the viability of our energy sector.
Keep your remarks around the motion, so please. And there is a new update. We have resources available until 8 p.m.
Je parle d'intelligence artificielle, madame.
I'm talking about AI, Chair. I'm on the subject. So the second recommendation asks the government to establish a public AI ecosystem that includes cloud infrastructure, data management infrastructure, as well as AI models and applications. So public infrastructure that is both physical and digital, that would promote responsibility and transparency, the protection of the public interest, and digital sovereignty in Canada. Another thing that we see in the third recommendation
du gouvernement fédéral
is that the federal government's activities should be based on an accountability framework based on consultations with unions, researchers, universities, and members of civil society, and their recommendations should be integrated. So the government should ensure that all decisions be based on impartial research and data from sector tables and from the Canadian Observatory on AI. And the union itself, in fact, recommended the creation of this body within the government. And there was a fourth recommendation, Chair, that the federal government invest in order that Canadians may be able to acquire the digital skills necessary for the use of AI. That is to say, to improve their skills or to requalify. So programs need to be strengthened, the ones that make up our social security net, employment insurance, for example, in order to support those people who may be displaced as a result of AI. And in the supplementary questions, the ones that the union wanted the government to integrate in its consultation, we see, first of all, the question, what research is necessary to understand the impact of AI on work? And in Canada, we don't yet fully understand the impact of AI on work conditions, in terms of job loss, in terms of skills and training that are necessary. We know that AI can affect various job categories in different ways and often in unequal ways, even within one workplace. So the research done by the Canadian Union of Public Employees and in the context of its survey of its members, we see the information on the best approach qualitatively and quantitatively to assess the impact of AI. Internationally, there are different evaluations according to which AI will affect jobs. The majority of economists say that the repercussions are difficult to predict since we don't know how AI is going to evolve and at what speed. Statistics Canada has said that 31% of workers have jobs that may experience a radical transformation or disappear as a result of AI. 29% of jobs will require the use of AI systems. Some research shows that research on the use of AI will affect jobs mostly affected by women who are 2 times more at risk than men, and that's important, Chair. So research also shows that the increase in algorithmic management in workplaces amplified by AI affects workers' well-being. It harms their fundamental rights and influences power dynamics with their employers. And there's a footnote, and it's important to acknowledge this research, and it's from Antonio Aluazi and Valerio De Stefano, who were consulted in 2025. And this was a scientific paper called AI at Work, Algorithmic Buses, and the Ambivalence of Automation, Artificial Intelligence, and Labor Lie, Armin Granulo, and et al. It was published in The Social Cost of Algorithmic Management from the well-known Harvard Business Review. And I'd like to point out, Chair, that this was also mentioned in algorithmic management and platform work, understanding the psychosocial risk and experiences of food couriers in Finland. Algorithmic discrimination, examining its types and regulatory measures with emphasis on U.S. legal processes. So, Chair, I'm practicing my English, as you can see, and Quebecois Liberal members inspire me. They speak English on a regular basis. However, I know very well that the only official language in Quebec is French. And Chair, that doesn't mean that we can't learn another language. The proof is that in Quebec, the people are the most bilingual. However, it's the one place that only has one official language, French. Chair, I will continue with my presentation that has to do with what we heard from the Canadian Union of Public Employees.
I'm hearing from members that many members have commitments and they have to leave. So I can suspend the meeting at 6:30 and we can come back to it if this is not resolved before that, and come back to it on Thursday. Thursday, we are actually scheduled for a briefing session with the Chief Institution of Statistics Canada. And if we continue with this, then I can suspend and cancel that meeting and continue with this meeting. So
we'd rather not have to suspend. I mean, it took a lot of time to get the chief statistician on Thursday, and we'd like to hear him speak. So maybe we can either continue this debate of this motion near the end of the Thursday meeting, so we get some time with the chief statistician. So
we cannot either we vote it down and continue with it. We as long as I have two more speakers on the list, we cannot dispose of until we vote on it. So, and until the speakers list is exhausted. So, we have MP Baldinelli and MP Noor Mohammed on the list after MP Blanchet Jonka. So, okay. So we have MP Noor Mohammed on the list after MP Blanchet Jonka. So, but all the members will not be able to stay beyond that. So. I just wanted to let everyone know so that everyone is aware of the situation. Thank you, MP Blanchet-Jean.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, d'être aussi.
Thank you, Chair, for being so benevolent toward the members of this committee, and thank you for respecting the speaking order. So here we can see in this brief, I was talking about the fact that AI tools used for hiring have turned out to be discriminatory toward women, Black Canadians, racialized persons, and persons living with disabilities. The oversight effected by AI and the decision-making tools, automated decision-making tools, can harm the health and safety of workers and harm their right to privacy. These are tools that can also dissuade people from taking the breaks that they have the right to take, or they can be penalized when they take them. It can increase the speed of their work and bring about psychological issues, and there's mental health issues. And employees have very little control on their work processes. So, labor legislation with respect to control and coercion, if employers use intrusive algorithmic tools involved with AI. So in the brief from the union, we see that we need to increase the amount of research done and increase access to qualitative and quantitative data to understand these changes in workplaces, in all of the industries of Canada's economy, and ultimately the repercussions of AI in terms of the negative effects with respect to workplaces. And these data support active planning by the government in order to mitigate the negative effects of AI on workers. StatsCan should collect data on the effect of AI on work. These data should be supported by qualitative research done on a continuous basis funded by the federal government in order to assess the repercussion of AI on privacy, human rights, skills, and training, as well as on health and physical and psychological safety for workers.
Madame la Présidente, qui est abordée par...
Another question that was touched on by the Canadian Union of Public Employees is as follows. How can the federal government support workers affected by AI? The union says that workers want the pan-Canadian AI strategy to determine the risk of their jobs disappearing in order to allow them to obtain new skills. The government should strengthen its social policies in order to provide workers with the ability to gain new skills or to retrain. They should also receive income support during this transitional period. Workers should not have to pay for the cost of these technological changes. The government should support these changes by strengthening the social safety net, mainly by increasing employment insurance payments, by better supporting training, and by providing labor market strategies. Workers also need the government to pass legislation and regulation that will prevent the deterioration of good jobs that could be brought about by AI. The federal government should work with the provinces in order to promote transparency during the implementation of AI systems in workplaces. Transparency, Madam Chair, that's what we don't see from this government.
Sont rarement au courant des données collectées ou de
For now, workers are rarely aware of data collected or of implementation of AI in their workplace. Employers should have to inform their employees, unions, and the population at large on the objectives of the technology used or of the data collection, as well as the parameters, the rules, and the underlying commands of the system. Provincial and federal law should lay out restrictions and protective measures when algorithmic management systems are used, as they can lack transparency, explainability, and equity, contain biases, be discriminatory, and represent a risk for health and safety of workers.
utilise des algorithmes opaques.
Algorithmic management systems use opaque algorithms to process employees' data and carry out hiring, assign tasks, plan schedules, evaluate returns, and carry out disciplinary measures up to and including firing. Workers need transparency as well as protection of data and private life so as to protect their dignity and autonomy at work at a time where intrusive surveillance technology can limit their movement and track their emotions, their tone of voice, and their yield. I'll move on, Madam Chair, to another question laid out in the same memorandum. What voices have not been heard in the context of consultation for the AI strategy, which should have been? We can't know, Madam Chair, as MPs. The government doesn't want to tell us who participated in the consultation and what they said, so we're following hypotheses. I'll read the union's response. They mentioned that the best way to reinforce trust in AI is to ensure that people affected by AI participate in consultations on Canada's approach in this matter. Even though CUP is happy to have an employee participating in the working group on the AI strategy, representatives of the industry and researchers favorable to AI benefit from much greater representation within the group. We already have a problem, Madam Chair. There is a lack of representativity within a group created by the government itself. The union mentions that the government should ensure that multiple unions participate in the consultations. given disparities in the repercussions of AI in different sectors. For example, people in creative professions are already affected in many different ways and require targeted measures to protect their rights and their jobs. All consultations must include a broader diversity of voices from civil society who will be able to contribute knowledge as far as privacy protection is concerned, or civil liberties, data rights, and human rights. Furthermore, we also need to consult specialized researchers to deal with the repercussions of AI on work, AI governance, biases, and discrimination, which can be reproduced by AI systems, protection of data and private life, lack of representativity of consultation processes, call into question their legitimacy, as well as the authenticity of the federal government's intentions as far as AI is concerned. Another point that is brought up in the questions is the issue of research and talent. The question is as follows: how does Canada preserve and increase its
Canada devrait miser. Il pourrait jouer
first mover advantage as far as AI is concerned? What can Canada invest in so as to preserve its status as a world leader? Promising fields, allowing Canada to have a first mover advantage, strategic decisions concerning fields where we need to be competitive, collaborate, or delay efforts. So they talk about a balance between fundamental and applied research. Canada should attempt to develop AI that fosters the common good and places the environment and the needs of workers and communities at the forefront. The federal government should launch a public innovation hub where researchers,
des représentants et représentantes du gouvernement.
Union representatives, university representatives, and government representatives would collaborate to direct research so as to develop AI that meets the needs of the population. These research and development activities should deal with problems in the workplace and in the community. Canada should invest in research not to replace workers, but to build their capacity. So their voices should be at the heart of research, of technological design and implementation. Involvement of workers in the different steps, parentheses, definition of the problem or potential advantages, design of technical characteristics and work processes, and training of the workforce tend to result in better results than a top-down approach. So their participation increases the probability that generative AI tools will be used in an efficient way and improve the quality of jobs. An investigation in the United States revealed that people with influence on technological tools used in the workplace are twice as likely to feel fulfilled in their jobs. It's interesting, isn't it? We see that technological tools can serve us, but they can also harm us. I'll continue along this line. Canada has an opportunity to increase its investment in research on biases and elimination of discrimination reproduced by AI, as well as to invest in systems that are less energy consuming and will result in fewer greenhouse gases. Canada should invest in developing an AI that integrates the principle of privacy protection from the design phase onwards. a proactive approach that would make protection of privacy a parameter by default. The Canadian government should also invest in funding a research ecosystem on the effect of AI on workers and the population as a whole. This research should deal with job loss, working conditions, algorithmic management, biases, and discrimination. Their incidence on the workplace and society, and consequences for privacy and the environment. The government can foster a continuous improvement loop so as for AI to help humans from the design phase onwards instead of harming them. This transition period requires true leadership, putting workers, communities, and the environment at the heart of AI research instead of centering tech companies' projected profits. The question is as follows: how can Canada reinforce coordination between universities, the industry, the government, and the defense sector so as to accelerate AI research? It starts with an announcement that mentions intersectoral collaboration mechanisms, integration of public research efforts with private research efforts, research funded by the industry, all while preserving university independence and academic freedom. The Canadian government should implement roundtables on AI research, bringing together researchers and representatives of post-secondary institutions and all tiers of government, federal, provincial, and municipal. CUP is also already requesting that the government set up a Canadian observatory on AI. On AI in the workplace so as to gather data and communicate research on the repercussions of AI on jobs. This observatory should bring together members of the academic sector, of unions, of civil society, and of the government. As the report of the union's consultative report indicates, there are few consultative organs outside of Quebec that would allow workers through unions to participate in data collection and coordination between social partners and in negotiation planning. Setting up sectorial tables would help define the needs of workers in different sectors faced with the wave of technological change brought about by AI. These tables would allow the setting up of hiring and workforce retention plans, would allow for discussions on the impact of AI automation and technological changes on the workplace, training, health and safety, as well as human rights. So setting up multidisciplinary tables would facilitate coordination of research on biases and discrimination, as well as privacy protection and data protection. Such a process should limit the participation of private and for-profit actors on research on the impact of AI. I will repeat, the Government of Canada should limit the participation of commercial and for-profit actors in the planning of research on artificial intelligence. That's what we're trying to know today. Having the contents of the public consultation at our disposal, we would know that some people said things that the government will retain, but that are not in the public interest. And we want to identify these people. Are they a threat for Canada? And are they going against the public interest? We also see, Madam Chair, in the same vein, companies can fund their own research without depending on public funds and resources. It's another very important element. As an MP, Madam Chair, I'd be very interested in analyzing the comments coming from the people and companies that participated in the consultation so as to know if they're trying to influence the government so as to obtain public funding for their interests. But today, the government is refusing this access and is saying that the truth is much too costly. Another question in the memorandum is as follows: what conditions must be fulfilled for Canadian AI research to be competitive at the global level while being founded on ethical principles? We read, Madam Chair, that from the outset, they mentioned catalyzers as far as infrastructure and talent and governance are concerned, as well as ethical norms and risk attenuation, harmonization of applied research with the needs of businesses and societies. So there is a wide range of catalysts that can place Canada at the forefront of research on AI systems that would serve the public good. So the federal government should commit to offering stable funding and to putting in place spaces for collaborative processes for broadcasting and disseminating the fruits of research projects. CUP recommended the creation of a public AI innovation hub, bringing together researchers.
So we will be sorry for interrupting MP Blanche-Jonca. We are at 6:25 right now, and as previously said that we will suspend the meeting at 6:30. So please keep that in mind, and we will resume back on Thursday. Yes, MP D. Ritter.
Can we just go to vote and not suspend? Is there an agreement to do so?
We cannot go to the vote, just for the information of all the members, that until we exhaust the speakers list, and then only we can go to the vote.
Can we just see if there's unanimous consent to exhaust the speakers list and then go to a vote so we don't suspend?
Yeah. No, here MP Blanche-Jonca has the floor. We cannot do that. MP Blanche-Jonca.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, de rappeler les règles et procédures de ce.
Thank you for reminding our colleagues of the rules and procedures of this committee. I was mentioning that there are all sorts of catalysts that could place Canada at the forefront of research on AI systems. So as for them to serve our common interests, the federal government should commit to offering stable funding and collaborative spaces for the dissemination of research. CUP recommended the creation of a public AI innovation hub that would bring together researchers, members of unions, and government representatives. The creation of a Canadian AI observatory would facilitate coordination and dissemination of major research on the impact of AI on work. Finally, the creation of sectorial tables would facilitate evaluation of the repercussions of AI on the workforce and at-risk industries so as to put into place strategies to actively support workers. And I will ask a question that is asked in the report. What efforts are needed to attract, develop, and retain top AI talent across research, industry, and the public sectors? We're talking about distinct mechanisms for research relative to the talent applied national and international strategies to attract talent, targeted attraction programs in priority domains, international collaboration opportunities. It's mentioned that there is no doubt that an AI innovation hub would play a leading role in building AI for the public good and would draw much talent. The federal government also has many IT specialists who could be supported to upskill and develop AI development skills. These workers should be supported with targeted training and upskilling education. By investing in its own workforce, the federal government would be building its internal capacity to develop worker-centered AI applications that can augment workers and result in better public services.
On the side, we have MP Blanchet-Jonca speaking, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, de ce manque de respect qui est effectivement à dénoncer de votre part. Je pense.
Thank you for pointing out this lack of respect, which is indeed to be denounced. This demonstrates that, first of all, our colleagues are not interested, but I'm very pleased that you are fulfilling your role, and thank you profusely. They mention the importance of AI Innovation Hub to ensure that AI serves the public good. So, by investing in its staff, the federal government would invest in its capacity to develop AI, but also would build its capacity to reinforce public services, research.
Jonca, if I can have the attention of all the members, it is 6:30. And as I mentioned earlier, members have to leave. They have some other commitments. So I will suspend the meeting, and then we can get back on this same meeting on Thursday. That's May 28th.
Yes, exactly.
Okay? Okay, so we will have to cancel the meeting on the briefing session with the Chief Statistician of Statistics Canada. Meeting is suspended.